Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Muskoka Bros Podcast. Today we have David and Matt discussing Matt's recent wolf hunting trip with his son Josh. You'll hear about, some of the mistakes, some positives, some things maybe Matt would like to do differently next time, and I'll let you listen in for a really a heartwarming story about the joys of helping out a friend in need. Northern Ontario can be a bit of an extreme place, especially if you plan on hiking through the wilderness looking for wolves on purpose. But as is a typical theme of Muskoka Bros, we really want you to kind of learn from our mistakes. We'd rather go out there and try something and make a mistake and show that for you guys, rather than maybe somebody is already nervous about going out into the wilderness and they go out, make some mistakes, and it kind of turns them off from the whole thing. What we'd rather do is get out there and do some things maybe that aren't quite right, but that you guys can learn from, and we're happy to make those mistakes on your behalf. And honestly, what we want to do is just aim to really inspire the people sitting on the couch right now to just get out there, right? So, to understand that you don't need to be an absolute pro to get out there and do something, but ultimately we want people getting out there, getting outside, just enjoying all that this creation has to offer. And I kind of feel like that leads us pretty well into our This Week in Wildness segment, with another book leading the way. This time it's called Wild at Heart. It's by John Eldredge. It's a Christian book, but I believe any man who wants to be a better dad, a better son, or just a better man in general would be able to really get a lot out of this book for sure. David and Matt touch on it a little bit in the podcast, so I'll kind of let them break it down a little bit further. And secondly, we have a YouTube channel recommendation from Matt. He watches these guys a lot. They also have a podcast and an Instagram page called Stuck in the Rut. That's in with an N. I mean, just an N, not with an N. They're an Alaskan family kind of showcasing the DIY hunting and teaching you how to be more successful on your personal hunts. And if you are a hunter or interested at all in getting into it, this is a great place to kind of get your feet wet. Again, and we're just learning something new about the outdoors. And for the third slot here in our segment, I want to take a quick trip across the pond to UK-based Mike Pullen at TA Outdoors, which is short for Totally Awesome Outdoors on YouTube and Instagram. And there's also a great story about his love for the outdoors, where it came from, as well as where the inspiration for the name of the YouTube channel came from, over on his website that you can check out. I really like watching Mike's stuff because it's the perfect blend of knowing when talking isn't necessary and when a little bit of explanation is more helpful. He also happens to do a lot of my favorite thing, which is shelter building. I mean, you could literally spend hours on his channel just looking at all the different ones that he's made. So you might as well go do that after you listen to this. You can definitely spend a lot of time on there, and he does a really great job with them, and is an inspiring guy for sure for me. So with that being said, though, that'll be the end of our This Week in Wildness segment. And as always, the links to this stuff will be in the description of the podcast, as well as the YouTube description for those watching on there. With that being said, let's dive right into Matt and Dave and this awesome hunting trip.
Hey guys, and welcome to Muskoka Bros Podcast. I am your host for today, Muskoka Bro Dave, and I am sitting with Muskoka Bro Matty, and we are going to be talking about his wolf hunting trip up north that he just got back from probably a few days ago. So Matt, give us a rundown of how you spent last week in the wild.
Okay, yeah. So, hey guys, I've been back. It is Monday today, and I was back on Friday afternoon, and I was gone from Saturday to Friday, so almost a full week. And it was a trip I had tentatively planned for, since last winter.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I wasn't planning on bringing my son up until just a few weeks / months ago, as I'm working through a book that David had put me on, and it really talks about the importance of fatherhood and the beloved son.
Yes, the book is called, oh my goodness, I'm blanking right now.
Wilder at Heart.
Wilder at Heart.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a part 2 to Wild at Heart. It's one of those books that if you want to kind of look inwardly on your kind of masculine journey, it's very faith-based, and it is one of those books that it makes you kind of look at your dad, and it makes you look at you as a dad, and it kind of makes you look at yourself when you were younger, and it helps you kind of remember some of the things you might have forgotten when you were a kid growing up, and kind of gives you really good lessons on how to just remember those important things that come up on the masculine journey, and maybe something that you haven't really looked at before. But it's definitely a good read. I completely recommend it to any guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it certainly has been a changer for me. And like I said, I've had this trip planned for a long time, and it's something I'm going to do yearly. I even have a bucket list ideas of going into Idaho or Wyoming or Montana for wolf hunting. But I'm so glad I brought my son. I think overall, this was a father-son trip. This was a family trip, and this was a bonding time that was probably the biggest thing that I wasn't planning on.
Mm-hmm.
I had tried to plan for a lot of things, and I'm more of a quickly throw everything together at the last minute and figure it out when you get there guy. But I'm so glad I did this wolf trip with my son.
That's awesome. Well, let's start from the beginning. Where all did you go? Like, did you just, plan to head up north, or did you have an itinerary,
Mm-hmm.
or were there people that you wanted to connect with in some sort of order, or was it just kind of go with the flow?
It's a little bit of all of the above. I knew for sure in about 2011, I started hunting Elk Lake and New Liskeard area. So if anyone knows Ontario, that's kind of the northeast corner, right near Quebec. It's kind of what I would call central Ontario, but a lot of people here call it northern Ontario. And so I'd hunted there several times, and I just knew it was wolf country. And I had hunted moose and bears, and I've really stopped moose hunting, so now mostly bear hunting up there. And I thought, if I'm going to come back, I'm going to go there for wolf hunting. But it turns out for this trip, that was just a little bit too far for me, and it would have been very, very remote. So I had, after wind back a few months ago, I met this great guy named TJ,
Mm-hmm.
and he's Woodsman87 on Instagram. And
Mm-hmm.
After meeting him, and David, you've met him as well.
Yeah.
He is just an epic hunter and knows the area well, and just has a huge family and lots of connections, and not only that, but he's willing to share them. So I knew for sure that was going to be kind of a touching point for the trip.
Kind of like a home base,
yes.
if needed.
Yeah, exactly. So when we went up there, we stayed the first 2 nights at his cabin. His parents have a farm, and they have a lake on the farm, Graham Lake, and that it's the northwest corner of Algonquin Park.
So they practically border with Algonquin Park.
Yeah, they're very close.
Which is really amazing.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, TJ was a big part of my planning. I have been inboxing with him for months, and he was actually giving me a lot of names of logging roads and places that I could go. If I wanted to go far away, he gave me a couple places. If I wanted to stay close, he gave me a few places. So he gave me some ideas like the area of Nipissing and Restoule, which are on the south side of Lake Nipissing, so kind of South Bay. So about northwest of Powassan, which is where TJ is. So I did some hunting there. I did some hunting sort of near TJ's place, a little bit north, because his actual town that he lives in is in a municipality that you can't wolf hunt in. So we had to go a little bit north of his place. But I would come back to his cabin for the first 2 nights, and that was amazing. And then we headed to another area called Mattawa, which if you go to North Bay and then you go northeast on Highway 63. Have you been to Mattawa?
I have.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's where my aunt and uncle used to live.
Oh, okay.
The camp up there.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, we went to the Mattawa area. We were about 20 kilometers from the Quebec border. And that was the most rugged area we were in. Really spotty cell coverage, very little traffic. But we found a couple roads that TJ had sent us to, and his dad Terry, with active logging. And so at least I knew some people would be driving by, but we didn't have cell coverage for the most part. If I sent a text or an email or anything like that, it was literally because I felt the bing on my leg.
Yeah.
And then I stop and I'd have a bar right there. And then I would get a hold of everyone and I'd send Catherine, my wife, I'd send her screen pics of where I am on a map. And that'll lead into things I'd like to do different next time. But yeah, so Mattawa area, McConnell Lake Road and French Road, active logging. And that was wolf country like crazy. There were dog prints across the road, up 6-foot banks with one leap. And so yeah, that was the most rugged area we went to. And then after we had been there for a while, we had come back down and we stayed on TJ's brother-in-law's ice shack. So on another lake, sort of in the general area, Wassy Lake it's called. We stayed on an ice shack for 2 nights, which again, that wasn't part of the trip, wasn't part of my planning, but it was like a super bonus that had happened.
Now, in comparison to the way that kind of Southern Ontario lives and the way that maybe North or Central Ontario lives, can you tell me some of the differences between the two? Like, without putting down either side. But like, as soon as I kind of met Terry and his family and anybody up in that area, I felt kind of a more trusting way of life. I think when you kind of spread out with people and less populated areas, I think you can kind of trust a bit more the people that are that way. You know, when there's more population, there's so many more people in a space. And you know, so if you could kind of give us an idea of what are the people like up that way?
Well, everyone that I've met there has been fantastic, and I'm not just saying that. They have been, what's mine is yours is basically their motto up there. And they rely on each other. Things are a little bit more harsh. You know, there's not as much of everything. So grocery store, there's one tiny little store, there's one little gas station, there's this and that. So you can imagine, I know for myself, when I come home to the farm and I'm low on fuel, I know I've got like 7 gas stations within X amount of kilometers. But just everything in general is just a little bit harder up there. And so I think people grow up relying on each other. And just the first time we met TJ and Terry, his dad was telling us about, oh, I just tuned up the chainsaw and then I just gave it to my neighbor. And it's like, and it's no big deal because all he was expecting is maybe just some help in the future. And so it's funny, David and I have joked about this because I love the south of the U.S. And I know David does too. And sort of the cliche of the southern people in the States being hospitable, that's what we found in the north here in Ontario.
For sure. Yeah, it's Yeah, a lot of like home cooking, a lot of hearty handshake type thing, and a lot of bartering, like, but in a give without any expectations.
Yeah.
That's what I at least that's what I found going up that way. But yeah, what were some of the challenges having Josh with you, and how do you think your trip would have differed if you'd kind of gone alone?
Well, my biggest concern was Joshua's safety, and I could see the stress in my wife when we were talking nuts and bolts just a few days before the trip, and she basically said to me, "What happens if you get hurt?"
Yeah.
And what happens? What does Joshua do? He's 11, so he can't carry me. He can't drag me. He can't drive my vehicle. It's standard. He wouldn't be able to drive it anyways, but it's just, there were so many things that I was worried about that way. So I planned a lot of my trip. I told Catherine I would dial down the intensity and that I would make this a trip that was more for Joshua's memory than for an epicness on my end. And so one rule that my wife and I decided on was I have to stay where I have cell coverage. So I scrapped one of the roads that TJ gave me, even though it actually looked fantastic, and it had wolf tracks everywhere, and it had open cut blocks, and it was literally everything I was looking for.
It was temptation.
Temptation Island right there. Yeah. and I had no cell coverage at all, like none, not even at the main road. And so I just knew it would be really, really irresponsible of me. So I went back a couple logging roads where I had saw a cell tower, and the one logging road I ended up camping on, I still only had one bar every once in a while, but I had one bar at camp. There was a kind of a big turnaround area where it was an old log deck where they piled old logs, and I camped in there. And I had one bar. Basically, if I stood on the bumper, I'd always have a bar. So that's where I would touch base in the morning, touch base at night, and send my wife an idea of where we were going. So Joshua was my big concern. And I just thought, what happens if I knock myself out? What happens if I can't walk, if I sprain an ankle really bad? You know what, it sounds morbid, but even if I accidentally discharge a firearm and shoot myself, I mean, that is not outside of the realm of possibility. And what would happen if my son was left in charge? Your mind can wander there, but it wouldn't be good.
Yeah. Now, like, a part of like the hunting aspect, like, you're used to going with other guys that generally know what they're doing, or are full-grown men that have a rough idea what it is to hunt. How was it having Josh with you? Was there a point where you were like, he's gonna think this is boring, or he was really excited, or like, was it harder to say set up your where you want to place yourself with someone that isn't hunting and is just learning?
Right. No, good question. Those are all things that have made my list of pre-worries and then post-happiness. So I really did have some pre-worries that Joshua was going to be very bored and also not want to work very hard. So we were snowshoeing. So about the 2 weeks leading up to the trip, I kept telling him, "Bud, we're going to be doing lots of walking and lots of snowshoeing, and it's going to be a lot of work." And he just was super excited. Excuse me. So that was a concern of mine, that, when I go out and I'm going to sit for an hour in one spot and barely move. I remember hunting with my kids when they were little, and they were like talking to me at full blast, and it just like completely ruined the hunts. So, so Joshua, when I'm with guys that understand that you don't talk, or you whisper, and you barely move, and you kind of move your head very slowly. It was funny because Joshua would get to the places where I'd say, "Okay, we're sitting down here." And a lot of times when we walked in on logging roads, and And then he'd be like, Dad, what about this spot? And even if I thought it wasn't that great, I'd be like, you know what? That's a good idea, bud. And so we would sit there, and then I would always tell him, we got to talk in a whisper. And every once in a while he'd forget and he'd talk at full bore. And I'm not going to say he ruined anything, because you know what? I didn't hear any howls back to begin with. So, But no, I set up a lot of spots that I knew he could duck down and away. And starting about halfway through the trip, he started to get a little bit more tired. And so when we would get to a spot where we're going to sit down, he would actually kind of lay down in the snow. There was even one spot he went and took a nap, which was great for me, because then he's not moving. But not once. And this made my list of like major like thumbs up, was that not once did he complain. He didn't say, when are we done, or how many more days, or do we not have to go out this morning, can we just go out in the afternoon. He was actually saying, Dad, let's get up earlier, this time, like, because he'd always say to me, well, what time is it at school, right? And I'd say, oh, it's lunchtime right now, or it's you'd be in your first class after lunch. And I remember one day we started hunting, and he said, what time is it? And I said, it's lunchtime at school. And he said, tomorrow let's get up earlier. Nice. So as far as Joshy kind of toting along and really not knowing how to hunt and sort of the etiquette of hunting and what can ruin a hunt, I'm really thankful that he's just not a fidgety little kid.
You can tell that with Josh, there's a lot going on behind those eyes, and very methodical, and he's such a great kid, and he's very quiet too, which is probably one of the better things to have as far as sons in when you're hunting. So how was it as far as seeing animals? Like, how close did you actually get to, say, a wolf, a coyote, a moose, a bear, anything like that?
So I guess I'll just say right off the hop, we weren't successful in harvesting a wolf. We didn't see a wolf. We didn't hear any howls back while we were wolf hunting. But that being said, there were 2 nights that wolves were howling. One night was when we were on the ice shack, and Joshy actually heard it, and I thought it was the stove whistling. And we went out of the ice shack, and you could hear the long, slow, sort of melancholy howls of a wolf. And then on our very last night, we were in Burkes Falls at Buffalo Brad's, and we were already done hunting and walking back, and the wolves way off in the distance lit up with those long howls. There were 2 hunts on the trip that were like kind of wolf or coyote specific. So I hunted one morning with TJ's brother-in-law Alex, and he's T Rouge 1 on Instagram. Him and I went to his mom's farm, and we did just a classic coyote setup. So we sit like sort of along a tree line, put the collar out in the field, and turn it on, and there's coyotes in the area there. So we did kind of a traditional coyote hunt there, not successful. And then at Brad's, Brad mostly has coyotes at his place, though he does have wolves, as we heard. But again, unsuccessful for coyotes there. So no dogs at all, no coyotes, no wolves seen. And bears are sleeping right now, so we didn't see them. But we did get close to a moose. I did one pic on Instagram. It was zoomed in on my camera phone. I would say it's about 90 yards in real life. And we were walking along, and then all of a sudden I look up, and at the end of the sort of trail was just a big brown moose standing there. And so I got a couple pics and a bit of video of that, and so that was very cool to see. It was a bull moose. He had already shed his rack, but you could tell by his size and his confidence that it was a bull. So that was very cool to see a moose, and that was in Jolly Township, which is kind of just east of Sundridge.
Okay.
Which was a spot that I wasn't planning on going, but somebody in Restoule told me about. Okay. So, we got to see a moose up close, and I know moose numbers in Ontario are not doing well, and that is also a very small part of why I want to get into this predator management. But yeah, that was the big animal we saw.
Well, that's really cool. I can't believe I said bear. As soon as I said bear, I was like, that's gonna sound really stupid. But the magic of editing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, never happened.
Never happened. So, what were some of the pieces of equipment that you wish you had that you might have forgot or maybe overlooked?
Okay, that is a long, long list. Do you maybe
give
do you want to do
highlights.
it in category?
I mean, it's a podcast. We can go on as long as we want, but
Okay.
let's say the top 3 or 4 things.
Okay, so by far storage. If anyone knows what a 4-door Jeep Wrangler looks like, that's what we were living in. It's also what we were storing everything in. It's also what we were driving in. It's also what we were warming ourselves in and holding, like just everything. So what we do is we fold the back seats forward, and we have a really nice little bed area, and that's amazing if you don't have to put anything in it. But I had 3 backpacks, and then a 4th because Josh was. So I had 3 backpacks myself. Mm-hmm. One is full of my hunting gear, one is my EDC, and one was other stuff. And then Joshua's got like a 4-liter pack, and then we had our snowshoes, tents, other blankets, tarps, big boxes for like a big box for food. And it was just, so the back looked like we were moving. And it's great until you get to where you're going, and then you can't hunt until you take all of that stuff out. And then you can't sleep until all of that stuff's out.
Yep.
And then, so where do you put that stuff if it's going to rain or snow? So I brought an extra tent, and I set up the tent wherever I was to put that stuff in, which is not a burden, but it's annoying that you got to set up a tent, throw your stuff in the tent, then you're looking for stuff in the tent, and you're crawling down and into a 2-person tent in order to reach something in the corner. And then on top of that, every time Joshua and I would get back to the Jeep when we were done like a set, we would have snow-covered snowshoes, and you can bang them off, but only so much snow comes off. So I'm putting wet snowshoes on top of sleeping bags. And then even like my gaiters and your backpacks, like sometimes we come back and it's snowing, so our backpack and our jackets are covered in snow.
Yep.
So you shake them off as best you can, but you're putting them back into the area where you're sleeping. It's like coming into your house and taking your boots off and putting them on your bed. It's exactly what it was like.
Yikes.
That was super frustrating, and I think that's solved with just a little rack on top. And then I just get boxes.
Yeah.
And then I just put all that stuff in nice weather-sealed boxes, and then I can actually just keep a few little things in the sleeping area. Even my firearms, I'd have all my firearms, they'd be laying there, and then I'd have all the stuff on top of them, and then I'd be like, oh, I want to grab this firearm, and then I've got to dig through it. And so that was problem 1, was storage, not enough space, not nearly enough space. So my storage area is my sleeping area. My sleeping area was my storage area. So very annoying. And I'd say, secondly, for gear, like I forgot the Goso cooktop. So and there's a voice in my head saying, get it out of David's Jeep or Toyota, get it out of David's Toyota. Yeah. And then by the time I texted you, you were already gone. So I didn't have that. So I made all my fires so that all the firewood is like a teepee, and I could cook on top of that teepee. That was a minor thing. I could have I went to a Canadian Tire. I could have bought a cooktop there. It was $40, and I was like, I have 2 really good ones. I don't want to buy one. Yeah. But probably just filming stuff. Filming, the whole trip is filmed on a phone and a little bit on a GoPro, but I kept the GoPro in the vehicle. And then no mounts. Like I had broke all my tripods, so there was no like shots where I have like a tripod like 20 feet away from me, just sitting there for 5 minutes filming Joshua and I. There's none of that kind of stuff. Like it's either me filming Joshua or Joshua filming me. There was 1 or 2 clips I think I took where I sort of put the phone somewhere and we'd like walk by it. So probably just, if I'm going to do this a lot more, I've got to get some more gear, like some more technical gear.
For sure.
So those are probably my 2 big things. There's like I've got a long list here of stuff. Oh, I guess you could call it equipment. It's one of these things that's like, if you're going to be a YouTuber, you absolutely have to have something that's going to record footage. So, I mean, it's a camera phone or whatever.
Yep.
But if you're going to be a hunter, you don't need a snowmobile.
Yep.
But it's one of those things where Joshua and I, we did this hunt at the end of the season. I mean, it was just like literally the very end. Like, weather was just turning. So all the snow that area is going to have is there. You know, it's not like we're start of the season or middle of the season. Like, all the snow that's going to fall in northern Ontario had fallen.
Yeah.
So our first hunt, Josh and I weren't even thinking about packed ground or anything like that. We threw our snowshoes on, and we were walking in 3 feet of snow.
Oh, wow.
And we walked like 150 yards, and I said to myself, I can't do this for a week, and let alone make my son do it. That's a great way to make him hate that trip. So I said, we've got to find places that have like access to a certain point, and then we can kind of walk out to a lake or something like that. And then when they sent me up north, everyone's got a snowmobile. So when I was in the Mattawa area, we were in the middle of nowhere, and there were snowmobiles whipping by. Like, not lots, like one every hour, but there was lots of snowmobile trails. So we actually ended up, the most kilometers that we ended up walking were on packed official snowmobile trails.
Nice.
And then we duck off of those. So I know on the farm, David and I have always batted around the idea of getting a little snowmobile just to bomb around on our 100 acres here. But if you're gonna, I don't know, maybe we'll get into this later, like the tactics of wolf hunting, but the guys that I was inboxing with, even during the trip, and I follow guys all over the world for wolf hunting, it's about kilometers. If you can't get far away from people and then call for 30 minutes, you know, then move a kilometer, call for 30 minutes, move a kilometer. If you can't do that, you're probably not going to be successful unless you're over bait, which I'm not really a big fan of bait hunting. So a snowmobile is almost essential if we're going to do a hunt in 3 feet of snow. It's almost essential. I wouldn't go back at the end of February or the start of March to Northern Ontario without a snowmobile. And a quad doesn't work. They get stuck instantly. I did get stuck on the second day in a quad. So now quad with tracks is another thing. But so I can either change the time of my trip, you know, to solve that equipment problem. I can go much earlier in the season. TJ tells me December is everything's frozen, lakes are frozen, ground's frozen, but there might only be 6 inches or 10 inches of snow. I can walk through that with shoes or an ATV. So yeah, those are the big 3 equipment things. The snowmobile, the camera and pods and mounts, and storage.
Yeah. To kind of echo like the whole storage thing and having a Jeep Wrangler, even just Jesse and my little quick trip last I think it was last summer to Mew Lake, we realized that everything had to be put up in the front 2 seats, and the seats were folded up, and like we were just doing an overnighter, and we just felt like space was an issue. So yeah, I think definitely a little basket on top of the roof would be a good idea with bins. There's another YouTuber, his YouTube channel is called I Am Jake, and he had, I don't know, he had like I think it was like a JK or a CJ40, I think, or what is it? Yeah. He has a pretty...
Like a 2-door?
Yeah, a little 2-door Jeep. And he's got his pack situation like down, like the rack on top. Then he's got bins for everything that he needs on top, because he sleeps in his Jeep. But yeah, I totally know the space issue when it comes to Jeeps, and actually that's, you know, one of the reasons why I've kind of switched to the Toyota, having that back space and stuff. But I don't know how much more room I'd have, but
that shelving unit that you have would be perfect.
Yeah. So, yeah, I totally know about having limited space and going on these trips. A week would be crazy, though. To kind of lead into the next portion of what we're talking about, how was the snack sitch?
Oh man, the snack sitch was dialed.
Yeah, okay, well, that's good.
On point.
Wow.
Joshua and I were a bunch of bachelors. like literally.
A couple swinging Ds.
It's
That's
like
good.
Crack a bag of chips wide open.
Yeah. It's
So-
like clack, clack, clack.
I've got video of Joshua, and I'm not talking like the little like Halloween bags.
Yeah.
I'm talking like the full 2 for $6 at the corner store
Nice.
of the Doritos, and
Yeah.
Joshy likes the Ripple.
Oh, yeah.
So we did a quick little shop in Powassan when we first got there on Saturday, and it was kind of like, let's just get some junk. Let's get that out of the way, and then like maybe in a day or two we'll get some real food. Well, we never went back for real food.
Okay.
We just kind of continued to like work through this junk that we bought and a little bit that my wife had packed. So Joshua and I, we were like, the bags of chips were consistently right in the center between the two front seats.
Mm-hmm.
And Josh would either be playing on his Lego or like snacking hard.
Yeah.
And same for myself. I had a couple little bags of candies.
Yeah, and your Legos.
And my Legos while I'm driving.
Yeah.
And what did I have real food? I had a Saturday night when I got to TJ's. His parents had us over. I'd had some great real food there. I had dinner at Brad's, Buffalo Brad's, on like 5 days later.
Mm-hmm.
Like a proper dinner.
Mm-hmm.
But that was it.
Wow.
That was it. Like we had lots of bars too. Like Joshy would have a granola bar for breakfast and a bagel.
Yep.
And so we had a bagel and peanut butter. We'd do that over the fire.
Nice.
Or over the stove. And then I had lots of like fruit roll up kind of stuff. Like, and we had tons of like, for emergency food in both of our packs. I made Joshy carry a little pack. He'd have like tons of like bars and water, and I'd have tons of bars and water in my pack too. So yeah, that's pretty much individual prepackaged was basically our whole trip.
Nice. Well, when it's two guys going out, no moms.
No.
It's kind of do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And I think, if you were to do that all year long, it's not very healthy, but
No.
when it's a father-son situation, I mean, you do what you have to, and you make memories and you bond together, which is great. So what did you learn?
I learned the value of time with my son.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep going back to that, but that's definitely that. Whether I get better equipment or not, it's completely irrelevant.
Yeah.
Compared to the time that I had with Joshua, that's completely priceless and irreplaceable. So I'm gonna start crying here if I keep talking like that. But
that's okay. That's okay.
I just had such a good time with my son, and that was so good. And I, there were some things about wolf hunting I learned that you're not gonna catch a wolf. I hate that word, catch. You're not gonna, harvest a wolf. You're not gonna be successful. You're not gonna call them in the way we were doing it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not gonna happen. It would be really dumb luck that we just randomly were within 500 yards.
Mm-hmm.
And that's possible, but when you're dealing with thousands of square kilometers, the way we hunted is not going to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
But I learned that there's a ton of beauty out there. And the lack of light pollution, I mean, even at TJ's cabin, there's still a little bit of light pollution from the houses and stuff. Mm-hmm. But being in the Mattawa area, it was just, you're on your own.
Mm.
And if that cell phone bar drops, you're really on your own, and you're kind of stripped down. And I always, when I'm walking around, I feel pretty safe. And when I've got a firearm over my shoulder, I feel even safer. But when you're out there and there's no recovery, you're the only thing that's going to keep you from any problems, you realize kind of how tiny you are and how big the world is. And Joshua would always point up at the stars, and he'd point out the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper everywhere we went. But yeah, I guess I'll just say what I learned is that share your passion with your kids, and whether they continue in it or not, those memories are irreplaceable.
That's well said. Yeah, it seems like you went out hunting for a wolf, but you really found a deeper relationship with your son, which is way more important, which is awesome. And they're not young forever, so we got to mold them while they're still young and moldable, and that's great. What were your top memorable moments, things that you will carry with you forever?
Every night going to sleep with my body right beside Joshua's.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Been there.
Yeah. It's warm, isn't it? Just every night was, night-night, Dad, night-night, Joshy.
Nice.
There was no going to another room. There was no hugging someone and then closing the door.
Yeah.
And it was just masculine time in like the best, most wholesome way possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my son still holds my hand when we walk in a parking lot, and he'll still let me hug him, and that's just so precious, and I hope that doesn't go away, but I know it probably will. And so while I can still hold my son's hand when we went to North Bay to the movie theater,
Nice.
and then say, good night every night on that trip right beside him, like literally most nights our bodies were touching, and so that was probably the biggest thing was this, you're so close.
For sure. Yeah, I actually am myself looking forward to planning like a little solo trip, but the solo trip isn't completely solo. It's bringing Jesse with me, and
Nice.
So that's something I look forward to, and something that I'm kind of through this podcast kind of learning some of the tips and stuff that you are doing with Josh on this trip that Jesse and I would like to duplicate at some point. And so what advice would you give someone planning this kind of trip?
Well, in particular, if you want to go to Central and Northern Ontario and wolf hunt, I would definitely say get an electronic collar so that you can make some noise far away from you and some loud noise. Work on your howls for sure. All of the howls that I was doing and guys that I follow are all just right with their voice. And you got to have a vehicle that can get down. I mean, there was lots of times I got out of the vehicle and I looked ahead and stepped forward to see if I could get through something. So you certainly got to have a vehicle that can get out there, 4-wheel drive at minimum, but good tires and possibly some self-recovery. That's a must. If you're going to go out there by yourself, make sure that's good. Battery. The day before we left, I had to winch the Jeep through some snow, and I almost killed the battery, and that kind of hung over me the whole trip.
Yep.
I did not want to let that battery. I didn't want to run anything after hours. Joshua wanted to watch a movie at night, and I was just like, Joshy, we can't. Which we ended up playing chess, which was great. That's another great memory. But your vehicle has to be reliable, and you have to be able to get through stuff or self-recover if you're going to go out there. Don't go out there in a Subaru Forester. Don't do it. Go out there in something like a Wrangler or a Tacoma or something that has some aggressive tires on it at minimum, and then some recovery stuff with it. And if you can go out there with like a sat phone or a Garmin InReach, that would have changed my whole plan. I would have stuck the road that TJ and his dad told me to go down was an awesome road, McConnell Lake Road.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it because I had no way of communicating, but had I had something satellite that can communicate, then I would have done that trip, and I would have probably done that for a few days because it had clear cut. Now I grew up in northern BC, and I'm used to clear cuts. Like the world's largest clear cut is outside of my hometown. You can actually see it in sat images from the moon, and so I'm used to massive clear cuts or even smaller clear cuts. And when I got to McConnell Lake Road, that was what I was picturing in my head, was these clear cuts that I can kind of get off the logging road, and I can kind of make some calls, and I can see what's coming at least a couple 100 yards. And when I ended up having to stick to a road that had cell coverage, it had selective thinning, and so I couldn't see crap. That was a big part. So if you're planning a wolf hunt, plan on areas that have logging recent or in the last few years or active, but make sure, if you can find out at all, if you can look at sat images, or if you can even contact companies in the area that might be logging or hunters in the area, find out if it's clear cuts, and I'm not talking like 1,000-acre clear cuts, but if they're 100 to 300 acre clear cuts, at least you can see. And that's the thing is actually prey. There's lots of ungulates like moose and deer. They love clear cuts because they eat the fresh browse and they eat the trees that are knocked over. So if prey is going there, predators are going there too. And the predators love it because, well, that's where prey is. There's lots of rabbits. There's lots of, if there's moose or deer in the area. But as well, they can pick paths that are beat down. They can beat down a path across that clear cut. And they use logging roads like crazy too. So you got to get out to logging because they go up and down those roads for miles. The amount of wolf tracks, and I'm in the middle of nowhere. This ain't somebody walking their dog. And it's just wolf tracks all across down the logging road for miles. And then they hop up 6-foot snowbanks, and they're up and over, and they're in 3 feet of snow. And you imagine the amount of calories they're burning to do that. So they got to eat.
Yeah.
So gots to eat. So if you're going to wolf hunt, you got to have the right vehicle. You got to have the right predator calling equipment. You got to have a rifle that's going to reach out. Basically, it's got to be a deer or a moose or a bear rifle. It's got to be able to reach out a couple 100 yards and hit something that's going to be 130, 140 pounds. So we're not talking a 22. So you got to have the right rifle, and that means you got to have the right scope. You got to practice that. If you're not comfortable shooting 400 yards, they're not coming in to 75 yards like the coyotes do on a farm, so. And the right gear. So at night, it was, the coldest night was -30. Fortunately for us, that was a night in a cabin. We had a hard enough time keeping that cabin warm at -30. It was about -32. And
is that TJ's cabin?
Yeah. And she was drafty. I actually ended up
Really?
2 a.m, putting old underwear and socks underneath the door to try and stop some of that -30 breeze coming right in.
What direction would that wind be coming?
That was a south wind. Yeah. So it was coming right across the lake, right up the steps, right into the door.
Yeah.
And
that's cabin life.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I remember when you and I stayed in there, and I felt like I was melting. I was like, I wanted to roll off the bed and kind of sleep down beside where there was like air getting in from some of the gaps, and I was like, I had to put my sleeping bag up as a shield, or I was like gonna be a puddle. And Matt, you were, I guess, on the mattress on the floor, and I don't know, I think you got 3rd-degree burns. You look pretty crispy. But I know your method there was, don't let that fire go out or we're going to freeze.
Yeah.
But at the time, it's like, it felt like we were on the sun.
Yeah. I think that night was like -7.
Yeah.
And that was more the start of winter, so that kind of even felt cold for us.
Yeah.
So I was paranoid. I was like, I'm sleeping by the fire. I'm going to keep it going. And then, it was just way, way too hot.
Yeah. What a magical cabin and magical place, and a privilege to get to know the Tran family and how they do life and how they do things similar to how we do it, but different at the same time. Would love to go for another trip up there at some point.
No, they're just shout out to Carol and Terry and their whole clan. TJ and Ford, his brother, who was helped with my Jeep. A whole nother story.
Okay.
Maybe we'll get in. Well, I'll get into it right now, real quick.
Yeah, do it.
So this is how good the people are up there, and how good the Tran family is. So their youngest son, Ford, he's a mechanic, and obviously huge Ford fans with that name. But my Jeep, actually, the fan stopped working. It wasn't working that morning. We drove back, and
the same problem with mine.
So I did my whole trip with no fan. So I was okay when I was driving on the highway. Even driving 30, 40 kilometers an hour, I was okay. If I idled, it would heat up. So TJ says, or Ford says, I'll have a look at it in the morning. And so Joshie and I come up for breakfast, and he's already got it in the shop idling. Got all his equipment out, his diagnostic equipment, and he figured out the problem, and he said, if you bring it into the shop on Monday, we'll fix it. But I didn't want to take that time, and I didn't want to spend the money. I only had so much, I didn't have buckets full of money at that time, and I don't right now as this podcast goes. So I didn't want that bill, but I knew as long as I was driving, he told me that the secondary fan will come on the highway if it heats up, and so the primary fan wouldn't come on though. So at idle, it wasn't coming on. So that's how great those people are. That he just got up in the morning, grabbed my Jeep, brought it into the garage, and diagnosed it for like an hour.
Wow. Yeah, that's very different than some of the hospitality. I won't say that there isn't, but to just take that initiative and just have that brotherhood is refreshing, and I think it's starting to get scarcer and scarcer in our culture, to just be afraid of kindness. And but yeah, so I'm through all my questions. Was there any more stories that you had or wanted to add?
Well, it seems the more I talk about the trip, the more a memory pops in. But I would just say that I always say this to people and stuff like that when I'm talking hunting and pro hunting and anti-hunting and all that. But I would say 80% of hunting, 90% of hunting is camping. It's camping and hiking, right? And I would say maybe that other 10% is maybe the ability to take an animal down and maybe field dress it. That's about maybe 15 to 20% of all of the skill of hunting. The other 80% is snowshoeing in the winter, hiking in the summer, camping. We were winter camping, cold camping, and being out there. And I'm sitting in a pile of snow with my son beside me, and there's nobody within miles. I could yell for days and nobody's coming. And just the beauty of that. And at night, seeing every single star, like every single star, it looks like a painting. And all of that's because, that's a method of getting out there that we choose to do. And so, yeah, I just want to continue to show people that, that hunting is not sort of being time warped and dropped into a spot and grab an animal and go. Like, it's the same planning as planning a 5-day canoe trip or a 5-day hike trip, backpack trip. It's the same planning that goes in. It's the same gear. It's the same mentality. It's the same action. And so I just think that's often overlooked. And I certainly don't hunt in order to convince people to hunt. But what I want to do is I want to show people that love the outdoors, that love hiking and camping and canoeing, that Yeah, so do I, and I actually enjoy all those things while I'm hunting. And in fact, I can't hunt if I don't do those things. You can't hunt and not hike. You can't hunt and not camp.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's just all I hope to educate people with.
That's awesome. Now I wanted to hit you with just one last question. What do you think? You might have already answered this, but what do you think God was teaching you on this trip?
Well, I was short for money is one thing.
Mm-hmm.
I went to go buy something the first day or second day we got there. First day we got there, I had money to buy some stuff. The second day I was declined.
Mm.
Oh, this is a crazy story. This is going to take another 10 minutes.
That's fine.
Okay. So, not only was God teaching me about the preciousness of my son and let him know that he's my beloved son. I think we've clearly covered that.
Yep.
But the first night Joshua and I were hunting,
Mm-hmm.
We weren't too far from TJ's place, but I didn't know I've only been there once during the day where he took me.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was driving back at night in the dark, after Josh and I had walked out, I ended up taking a wrong turn, but I didn't know I took a wrong turn.
Mm.
And during that wrong turn, I ended up running across 3 snowmobilers
Mm-hmm.
that were clearly, one of them was broken down, and the guy was waving his arm for me to stop.
Mm-hmm.
So I stop and I roll down the window and I go, Jody?
Wow.
It's my neighbor from Willow Beach.
What?
Where we used to live. So my neighbor for 10 years, whose wife babysat my kids, him and his son and his best friend, the son's snowmobile was dead, broken down, motor blown. They didn't know where they were because there was no cell coverage. It was dark at night. They had no idea where they were. They only knew they were probably within 50 kilometers of North Bay. They had no idea where they were. And the only reason I ran into them is because the snowmobile trail became part of the road for just a very short period of time. And I took a wrong turn to run into them.
Wow.
So Jody goes, Matt? And I get out and his friend goes, okay, this is really weird. And he's like, I've got no cell coverage. I don't know where I am. Carson's snowmobile is broke down. I've been towing it for the last X amount of time, and I'm not going to have enough fuel to get to North Bay. They were already 6 hours in. They came from Severn Bridge. They were going to North Bay for the night on a snowmobile, 3 snowmobiles. So he says, I don't know where we are. I'm almost out of fuel. My snowmobile's heating up because I'm towing my son's snowmobile. And he's like, I can't believe you're here. So I said, I barely know where I am. But I said, I know where a house is where you can have a safe place to stop. So I said, if you just follow me back, we'll get you back to TJ's parents there, to Terry and Carol's. So he's following me, and about halfway there, he stops, and I back up, and he's like, I'm really overheating because there's no snow on the roads, and they need snow to cool down.
Mm-hmm.
I said, it's just a bit further, so we let the machine cool down. We get the snowmobiles to Terry and Carol's place, and we get them off into a side of and the one guy is, he phones the tow trucks in North Bay, and they won't tow from North Bay down to basically to Sutton. It's about 3 hours and then come back. They wouldn't do it because they didn't know how to figure out how to bill those charges. So he phones a tow truck in Sutton, where he's from, and the tow truck in Sutton is going to come 3 hours to Powassan and pick them up. But they got to get the right machine or the right tow truck with a flatbed to pick up 3 snowmobiles and take these guys back. So these guys have been they've been snowmobiling for about 7 hours.
Mm-hmm.
They're tired, they're hungry, they're stressed out.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the person that ran into them. And then God kind of just put it on my heart. He said, Matt, you know what? They're tired, they're hungry. Don't make them come into a stranger's house. They have 4 hours to kill.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, just give them your vehicle. So I said, hey, Jody, do you want to just take my Jeep to North Bay and you guys can go get dinner and a coffee and get refreshed? And he's like, are you serious? You're just going to give me your vehicle? So I took everything out of it. I folded up a seat for Carson and I gave him the vehicle for the night. No questions asked. So they got rescued. They got a vehicle into North Bay, which is about a half an hour away, so they could go to a restaurant and get food and get a coffee and get warmed up. And then they had all that time they could kill it doing whatever they wanted, and they didn't have to sit on the side of the road. And but the real blessed, not only was I just sort of blessed to be able to give, and that felt really good, but when I got up the next morning, I saw the tank was absolutely full of fuel. I mean, right full, and it was like a quarter tank. And then there was a 20 spot on the seat. And I had texted Jody, thank you so much. That was so thoughtful. And what I'm getting at with sort of the God thing here is that I was actually really low on funds on that trip. And we weren't going to have money for a few days until we got paid on Thursday. And that fuel that Jody put in the Jeep took me to Mattawa, took me back to North Bay, took me back to TJ's, and took me all the way to Burke's Falls with still a quarter tank left. So my entire trip, almost 3/4 of it, was on Jody's gas. And it was just a little thing for him. I know topping up someone's tank is not the hugest deal, but when you don't actually have the money to top that up, it was actually a miracle. So I have to say I took a wrong turn, and I told Jody and them, I said, you know what's even crazier than me rolling down the window and saying, Jody, was that I took a wrong turn to run into you, and I shouldn't have run into you. And so God provided for them, and he provided for me. And then he also provided for me an opportunity to feel the joy of being able to just freely bless. So that's a huge part of my trip too. And it feels like so long ago because it was on the first day, but that was a massive, massive thing. And God cares about the little thing, like the $60 top up of fuel. He cares about that.
For sure he does. It's funny because you keep saying the wrong turn. I think it was the right turn, you know?
Yeah.
And what are the chances that you run into a neighbor who's moved, like how far away from you?
Yeah, along the Severn Bridge.
And then to just kind of collide. That's where my faith kind of gets rejuvenated in hearing stories like that of how he has mercy for both sides, you know, which is amazing. So, well, this has been an epic journey, and I feel as though we probably haven't even scratched the surface.
Yeah.
But to kind of keep it kind of on a tangible amount of time, I think we'll cut it short here. But thank you very much, Matt, for sharing your trip with all of us, and we looked forward to hearing more from you and more of your stories with your son Joshua, and we look forward to hearing all about that. Now, if you guys are first-time listeners, just make sure that if you like this, that you guys follow along. We have our YouTube channel. We have Instagram. If you want to see more of Matt's epic trip, he's got pictures on his Instagram account, Muskoka Bro Matty. And we also have our main account, Muskoka Bros. And then Dylan and I have our own as well. So just give us a follow, kind of see what we're up to, like and subscribe. And most of all,
you just got to get out there.